Imagine a world where the most influential books of history are not what they seem, where the stories we've cherished and believed in for centuries are layered with artistic license and deliberate alteration. This is the reality of the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, 3 books that form the foundation of Christian belief and have shaped Western civilization. Yet, these texts are not the straightforward, unaltered accounts of Jesus' life and teachings that many assume them to be. Instead, they are intricate mosaics of narrative and theology, crafted by skilled authors who tailored their messages to specific audiences and purposes. This video will explore the complexities and nuances of the Synoptic Gospels, revealing how the Gospels we read today are the result of a sophisticated literary and theological process. The Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are called synoptic because they can be seen together and share a significant amount of content. They tell the same story, but with distinct differences in style, detail, and emphasis. These differences have puzzled scholars for centuries, leading to extensive debates about the relationships between these texts and the processes by which they were composed. At the heart of the synoptic problem is the question of which gospel was written first and how the others used it. The prevailing theory, known as the two-source theory, suggests that Mark was the first gospel written, and that both Matthew and Luke used Mark as a primary source. However, they also drew from a hypothetical collection of Jesus's sayings known as Q, and from their own unique sources and traditions. This theory helps explain the similarities and differences among the synoptics, but it is not without its challenges. One of the most striking aspects of the Synoptic Gospels is their narrative skill. The Gospel writers did not simply record events as they happened. They crafted their narratives with a degree of artistry and intention. For example, the nativity stories in Matthew and Luke are quite different and even contradictory. Matthew places Mary and Joseph in Bethlehem, where they have a house, and describes the visit of the Magi from the east. Luke, on the other hand, has Mary and Joseph living in Nazareth and traveling to Bethlehem for a census, where they find no room in the inn, and the baby Jesus is born in a manger. These differences are not just minor details. They reflect the theological and narrative priorities of each author. Mark, the shortest and earliest gospel, lacks a nativity story altogether. Instead, it focuses on the adult ministry of Jesus, his miracles, and his passion. The absence of a birth narrative in Mark is significant, as it allows the gospel to begin with the baptism of Jesus by John the Baptist, emphasizing the immediate start of Jesus' public ministry. This focus on the adult Jesus and his teachings is a hallmark of Mark's narrative style. The differences in narrative style and content are also evident in the accounts of Jesus' trial and crucifixion. Luke, for instance, includes a trial before Herod, which is not found in Matthew or Mark. This addition reflects Luke's broader narrative goal of presenting Jesus as a figure who is misunderstood and rejected by both Jewish and Roman authorities. The inclusion of the Herod trial also serves to emphasize the political and religious tensions of the time, adding depth to the story of Jesus' final days. Another example of narrative skill is the way in which the Synoptic Gospels present Jesus' teachings. Matthew, for instance, organizes Jesus' sayings into 5 collections, each with a specific theme. The Sermon on the Mount, which spans chapters 5 to 7, is a prime example of this organizational structure. Matthew's Gospel presents Jesus as a new Moses, delivering a comprehensive set of teachings that reframe and expand on the law of Moses. This structure is not found in the other synoptics, which suggests that Matthew had a particular theological agenda in mind. The differences in the accounts of specific events, such as the healing of the paralytic, further illustrate the narrative skill of the Gospel writers. Mark's version of the story is more concise and focuses on the faith of the paralytic's friends, who lower him through the roof of a house to reach Jesus. Luke's version, however, provides more detail and context, describing the paralytic being lowered through the tiles of a roof. These differences in detail reflect the literary preferences and narrative choices of each author. The theological concerns of the Gospel writers also play a significant role in shaping their narratives. For example, the way in which Jesus responds to the question of his goodness differs between Mark and Matthew. In Mark, Jesus says, "Why do you call me good? No one is good but God alone." This response is more challenging and reflects a theology that emphasizes the divinity of God and the humanity of Jesus. Matthew, on the other hand, softens this response to, "Why do you ask me about what is good? There is only one who is good." This change reflects the later theological development within the early Christian community, which sought to affirm Jesus' divine status. The ordering of material in the Synoptic Gospels also reveals the narrative and theological priorities of the authors. Matthew's Gospel is structured to resemble a Christian Pentateuch, with 5 major sections of teaching. This structure suggests that Matthew saw Jesus as a new lawgiver, much like Moses, and wanted to present his teachings in a systematic and organized way. Luke, in contrast, has a looser narrative structure, with anecdotes about Jesus that are not always set in a specific context. This reflects Luke's broader goal of presenting a more accessible and relatable portrait of Jesus. The synoptic problem also extends to the question of the source material used by the Gospel writers. The two-source theory posits that both Matthew and Luke used Mark as a primary source and a hypothetical collection of Jesus' sayings known as Q. Q is a hypothetical source because it does not exist in a physical form, but scholars have reconstructed it based on the material that is common to Matthew and Luke, but not found in Mark. This source is thought to have contained a collection of Jesus' sayings and teachings, with little narrative context. The existence of Q helps explain the additional material that Matthew and Luke share, which is not found in Mark. However, the two-source theory is not without its critics. Some scholars argue that Luke may have used Matthew as a source, rather than both authors using Q independently. This alternative theory, known as the Farah hypothesis, suggests that Luke revised Matthew, making changes to the order of material and preserving what are believed to be older versions of Jesus' sayings. The debate over the sources used by the Gospel writers is ongoing, and no consensus has been reached. The complexities of the Synoptic Gospels also extend to the way in which they were transmitted and preserved. The Gospels we have today are the result of a long process of copying and transmission, which has introduced variations and errors. Scholars use textual criticism to identify the most reliable versions of the Gospels and to reconstruct the original text as accurately as possible. This process is challenging, as it requires careful analysis of the manuscript evidence and a deep understanding of the historical and cultural context in which the Gospels were written. In conclusion, the Synoptic Gospels are not simple, unaltered accounts of Jesus' life and teachings. They are complex and nuanced texts, crafted by skilled authors who tailored their narratives to specific audiences and purposes. The differences in style, detail, and theological emphasis among the Synoptics reflect the diverse literary and theological traditions of the early Christian community. Understanding these complexities is essential for a deeper appreciation of the Gospels and their place in the history of Christianity.